Sometimes the most powerful moments happen when nobody's watching. When a man worth billions chooses to hide his identity and eat at a small diner, he thinks he's just looking for a simple meal away from the spotlight. But what he discovers changes everything he thought he knew about kindness, struggle, and the true meaning of wealth. This is the story of how a piece of paper with just a few words written on it shattered a billionaire's world and rebuilt it in ways he never imagined possible. What started as a secret dinner became a journey that would transform not just one life, but an entire commune. Marcus Wellington III pulled his baseball cap lower over his face as he stepped out of the ordinary sedan he had borrowed from his company's motor pool. The car was nothing like his usual collection of luxury vehicles, and that was exactly the point. Tonight, he wanted to be invisible, just another face in the crowd at Ruby's Diner on the east side of Chicago. At 62 years old, Marcus had built an empire worth over $8 billion. His face graced magazine covers, his name topped Forbes lists, and his every business move made headlines. But tonight, dressed in simple jeans and a worn jacket, he looked like any other tired man seeking a late dinner. He had discovered this small diner 3 months ago during one of his rare drives through the city without his usual entourage of security and assistants. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered the dimly lit establishment. Ruby's Diner was a throwback to simpler times, with red vinyl booths, checkerboard floors, and the comforting smell of coffee and home cooking. It was exactly 9:47 p.m., and the dinner crowd had mostly cleared out, leaving only a few scattered patrons reading newspapers or staring into their phones. Marcus chose his usual booth in the back corner, away from the windows and the main flow of traffic. From here, he could observe without being observed, something that had become increasingly difficult in his regular life. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from his assistant, his board members, and various business associates. But tonight he had turned off all notifications except for true emergencies. The waitress who approached his table was someone he had seen before during his previous visits, though they had never really spoken beyond the basic exchange of ordering food. She was a black woman who appeared to be in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a smile that seemed genuine despite what looked like exhaustion around the edges. Her name tag read Keisha, and she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been waiting tables for years. "Evening," she said, setting down a glass of water and pulling out her order pad. "Can I start you off with something to drink besides water?" "Coffee would be great," Marcus replied, keeping his voice neutral and unremarkable. "And could I get a menu?" "Of course," Keisha said, producing a laminated menu from her apron pocket. "The coffee's fresh. I just made a new pot about 20 minutes ago. Take your time looking over the menu, though I have to warn you we're out of the meatloaf tonight." Kitchen had a busy day. Marcus thanked her and watched as she walked away to get his coffee. There was something about her manner that struck him as different from the service he usually received. In his world, people either fawned over him because they wanted something, or they treated him with the careful respect reserved for powerful men. But Keisha's interaction with him was refreshingly normal, treating him like any other customer who deserved good service, but nothing more. When she returned with his coffee, Marcus ordered the pot roast dinner with mashed potatoes and green beans. It was comfort food, the kind of meal he rarely ate anymore since his world had become filled with business dinners at five-star restaurants and catered affairs where presentation mattered more than taste. "Good choice," Keisha said, writing down his order. "Ruby makes the best pot roast this side of the city. My grandmother used to make it similar, but Ruby's got her own special touch with the seasonings." As she spoke, Marcus noticed the way her face lit up slightly when she mentioned the food. It was clear she took pride in the establishment where she worked, even though it was obviously a modest place struggling to compete with chain restaurants and fast casual dining options that had sprung up around the neighborhood. While waiting for his meal, Marcus observed the rhythm of the diner. Keisha was one of only 2 servers working the evening shift, and she seemed to handle her section with remarkable grace despite being obviously busy. She refilled coffee cups without being asked, checked on customers at just the right intervals, and somehow managed to make each person feel attended to without hovering. The other customers were a mix of working-class individuals, some still in uniforms from various jobs, others dressed casually for what appeared to be social visits. Marcus noticed an elderly man in the next booth who seemed to be irregular, as Keisha knew his order without asking and inquired about his grandson who was apparently serving overseas. When his food arrived, Marcus was surprised by how genuinely delicious it was. The pot roast was tender and flavorful. The mashed potatoes were clearly made from real potatoes rather than a mix, and even the green beans had a fresh taste that spoke to care and preparation. This was honest food, made by people who took pride in their craft despite working in relative anonymity. As he ate, Marcus found himself thinking about the contrast between this experience and his usual dining. At the exclusive restaurants he frequented, meals were elaborate productions with multiple courses, exotic ingredients, and presentations that looked like art installations. The service was impeccable but formal, with servers who were trained to anticipate his needs and fulfill them seamlessly. But here at Ruby's, there was something more authentic about the experience, something that felt more connected to the actual purpose of sharing a meal. Keisha stopped by his table twice during the meal to check if everything was satisfactory, and each time Marcus found himself wanting to engage in more conversation. There was an intelligence in her eyes and a warmth in her manner that made him curious about her life beyond this diner. But he maintained his anonymity, responding politely but not encouraging extended discussion. Near the end of his meal, Marcus overheard a conversation between Keisha and the elderly gentleman in the next booth. The man was explaining that his Social Security check had been delayed, and he was worried about making his rent payment on time. Keisha listened with genuine concern and suggested he speak with Ruby about possibly picking up some extra shifts helping with prep work in the kitchen. "Don't you worry too much, Mr. Patterson," Keisha said gently. "Ruby's good people, and this neighborhood takes care of its own. We'll figure something out." The exchange touched something in Marcus that he had not felt in years. In his world, financial problems were solved with phone calls to banks or investment firms. Personal struggles were handled by teams of assistants and advisors. But here was a simple human interaction where one person was offering comfort and practical help to another, with no expectation of return or recognition. When Keisha brought his check, Marcus noticed that the total came to $12.47. In his regular life, he routinely spent more than that on a single drink at business dinners. The modest price somehow made the quality of the meal and service even more impressive. He pulled out a $20 bill, planning to leave a generous but not suspicious tip. As Keisha collected his payment and headed to the register, Marcus noticed her pause slightly as she walked past a bulletin board near the kitchen entrance. The board was covered with local job postings, community announcements, and what appeared to be some personal notices. Keisha stared at one particular piece of paper for several seconds, and even from his distance, Marcus could see her shoulders tense slightly. When she returned with his change, her demeanor was subtly different. The easy smile was still there, but Marcus sensed something had shifted in her mood. She thanked him for coming and wished him a good evening, but there was a distraction in her manner that had not been there before. Marcus left his tip on the table and gathered his jacket, preparing to leave. But as he stood up, he found himself hesitating. Something about the evening, about the authenticity of this place and the people in it, made him reluctant to return to his insulated world of luxury and isolation. For the first time in months, he had felt like a normal person having a normal experience, and the prospect of going back to his empty mansion felt somehow hollow. 3 days later, Marcus found himself thinking about Ruby's Diner during a particularly tedious board meeting at his company headquarters downtown. While his executives discussed quarterly projections and market expansion strategies, his mind wandered to the memory of Keisha's genuine smile and the comfort of that back corner booth. By the time the meeting ended at 7:30 p.m., he had made his decision. This time, Marcus took even more care with his disguise. He chose older clothes from the back of his closet, items he had not worn since his college days that had somehow survived decades of closet cleanings. He even rubbed a little dirt on his hands to make them look more like those of someone who worked with them for a living. The transformation was remarkable. In the mirror, he saw not the polished billionaire who commanded boardrooms, but someone who looked like he might work construction or maintenance. Ruby's Diner was busier on this Tuesday evening. with nearly half the booths occupied and a steady stream of customers at the counter. The familiar smell of coffee and home cooking welcomed him as he entered, and he felt his shoulders relax in a way they rarely did anymore. He chose a different booth this time, wanting to observe from a new angle while still maintaining his preferred anonymity. Keisha was working again, and Marcus watched her navigate the busier shift with the same grace he had observed before. She seemed to remember every customer's preferences, from how they liked their coffee to whether they wanted extra napkins. Her efficiency was impressive, but what struck Marcus most was how she managed to make each interaction feel personal despite the faster pace. When she reached his table, Keisha paused for just a moment, and Marcus wondered if she recognized him from his previous visit. But her greeting was the same professional warmth she showed all customers, and he relaxed as she took his drink order and provided him with a menu. "The pot roast is still excellent if you're interested," she said with a slight smile. "Though tonight I'd also recommend the meatloaf." Ruby's outdone herself with the glaze. Marcus thanked her and decided to try the meatloaf, curious to experience more of Ruby's cooking. As Keisha walked away to place his order, he noticed her stop again at that same bulletin board near the kitchen. This time, he could see her more clearly as she stood there, and he watched her face change as she read whatever was posted there. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Her professional composure faltered for just a moment, revealing something that looked like worry or distress. Curiosity getting the better of him, Marcus excused himself to use the restroom, which required walking past the bulletin board. As he approached, he could see what had been capturing Keisha's attention. Among the job postings and community announcements was a notice from the City Housing Authority about pending evictions for late rent payments. Several addresses were listed, and one of them had been circled in blue ink. The notice was dated for the following week, giving tenants just 5 days to bring their accounts current or face removal from their homes. Marcus read through the legal language quickly, his business experience helping him understand the serious implications. This was not just a warning. It was a final notice before legal action would be taken. When he returned to his booth, Marcus found himself studying Keisha with new eyes. Her professional demeanor remained intact, but now he could see the subtle signs of stress she was carrying. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes when she thought no one was looking, the slightly hurried manner in which she moved between tables, the brief moments when her composure seemed to slip. His meal arrived, and the meatloaf was indeed excellent. But Marcus found himself eating automatically while his mind processed what he had discovered. If Keisha was facing eviction, it explained the tension he had sensed during his previous visit. It also raised questions about the economics of working at a place like Ruby's Diner. He had left generous tips on his previous visits, but clearly the wages and tips from this job were not sufficient to keep up with basic living expenses. As the evening progressed, Marcus observed more details about the diner's operation. The customer base was clearly working class, with many people ordering carefully and counting out exact change or small bills to pay for their meals. The prices on the menu were modest, designed to be affordable rather than profitable. Ruby herself emerged from the kitchen several times, a woman in her 60s with graying hair and hands that showed years of hard work. She greeted several customers by name and seemed genuinely concerned about their well-being. Near closing time, Marcus was one of only 3 customers remaining in the diner. He had ordered coffee and pie to extend his visit, wanting to understand more about this community he had stumbled into. From his booth, he could overhear conversations between the staff as they began their closing routine. "Keisha, honey, you don't need to stay late to help with prep tonight," Ruby called from the kitchen. "You've been working extra shifts all month. Go home and get some rest." "I don't mind staying, Ruby," Keisha replied, but there was a weariness in her voice that contradicted her words. "The extra hours help, and you know I appreciate the work." "Child, I know you're dealing with some things right now," Ruby said, her voice carrying the authority and affection of someone who had become a surrogate mother to her employees. "But wearing yourself out isn't going to solve anything. You take tomorrow afternoon off, you hear me?" Marcus could see Keisha's internal struggle as she wrestled with the offer. On one hand, she clearly needed the income from the extra hours. On the other hand, Ruby's concern was genuine, and refusing the kindness would be difficult. "I'll think about it," Keisha finally said. But Marcus suspected she would find a reason to work anyway. As Marcus prepared to leave, he found himself facing an unusual dilemma. In his normal life, he could solve financial problems with a simple phone call or wire transfer. He had charitable foundations and giving programs that donated millions of dollars annually to worthy causes. But this situation was different. Keisha was not asking for help. She was not even aware that he knew about her circumstances. Any assistance would have to be offered carefully to preserve her dignity and privacy. Moreover, Marcus realized that he did not even know her last name or her specific situation beyond what he had observed. The eviction notice had listed multiple addresses, and he could not be certain which one, if any, belonged to her. His impulse to help was strong, but his approach would need to be thoughtful and respectful. As he gathered his jacket and prepared to leave his payment, Marcus made a decision. Instead of simply leaving cash on the table, he would write a note. Nothing that would reveal his identity or create an obligation, but something that might provide Keisha with the means to address her immediate crisis while maintaining her autonomy. He pulled a small piece of paper from his jacket pocket and wrote carefully in block letters that disguised his handwriting. "Thank you for the excellent service and genuine kindness. You make this place special. I hope this helps with whatever challenges you're facing." Below the message, he placed 5 $100 bills, folding the paper around them so the money would not be immediately visible to other customers or staff. The amount was significant enough to potentially cover a month's rent, but not so unusual that it would create suspicion about his identity. Marcus had observed enough of the diner's operations to know that while large tips were probably uncommon, they were not unheard of in establishments where regular customers developed relationships with staff. He left the folded note beside his coffee cup and walked to the register to pay his check. Keisha was busy clearing another table, so he paid Ruby directly, exchanging pleasantries about the quality of the meal and the welcoming atmosphere of the diner. As he walked toward the door, Marcus turned back for one last look at the S. Marcus had planned to wait at least a week before returning to Ruby's diner, but he found himself unable to concentrate on his work. During meetings with international investors and calls with his executive team, his mind kept drifting to wondering how Keisha had used the money he had left. Had it been enough to solve her immediate problem? Was she still working extra shifts? Or had Ruby succeeded in convincing her to take some time off? By Thursday evening, his curiosity overcame his caution. This time, he arrived at Ruby's diner just as the dinner rush was winding down, hoping to observe without being too conspicuous. He chose the counter instead of a booth, thinking it would be easier to blend in among the other solitary diners who preferred the more casual seating. Keisha was working, and Marcus immediately noticed a change in her demeanor. The tension he had observed in her previous shifts seemed to have eased considerably. Her smile appeared more genuine, her movements less hurried, and there was an overall lightness to her interactions with customers that had been missing before. Whatever crisis she had been facing appeared to have been resolved, at least temporarily. Marcus ordered the evening special and coffee, engaging in brief conversation with Ruby's son, Tommy, who was working the grill. The young man was in his early 20s and spoke enthusiastically about his plans to expand the diner's catering business, sharing ideas about mobile food service and online ordering that showed an entrepreneurial spirit Marcus recognized and admired. "Mom's been cooking these recipes for 30 years, Tommy explained as he prepared Marcus's order. "People in this neighborhood grew up on her food, but we could be reaching so many more people if we had the right setup. Food trucks are huge right now, and with the right investment, we could have a whole fleet serving different parts of the city." Marcus listened with genuine interest, impressed by Tommy's knowledge of the food service industry and his clear vision for growth. The young man had obviously done his research and understood both the opportunities and challenges involved in expanding a small family business. What he lacked was capital, the same barrier that prevented many promising entrepreneurs from pursuing their dreams. As he ate his dinner, Marcus found himself developing a broader understanding of the economic ecosystem surrounding Ruby's diner. This was not just a restaurant struggling to survive. It was the center of a small community of people with dreams, ambitions, and challenges that were all interconnected. Keisha's housing crisis, Tommy's business aspirations, Ruby's desire to provide good jobs while maintaining the character of her establishment. All of these elements were part of a larger story about working-class Americans trying to build better lives. Midway through his meal, Marcus noticed Keisha approaching the counter near where he sat. She seemed to be working up the courage to do something, glancing around the diner before finally speaking to Tommy in a voice loud enough for Marcus to overhear. "Tommy, I want to talk to your mom about something," she said, her voice carrying a mix of nervousness and determination. "That generous tip I got the other night, it solved my immediate problem, but it also got me thinking. I've been saving up for community college for 3 years now, and between that money and what I had put away, I think I can finally enroll for spring semester." Tommy's face lit up with excitement. "Keisha, that's amazing. What are you going to study?" "Business administration," she replied, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. "I've been watching how your mom runs this place, learning about inventory management, customer service, employee scheduling. I think I could be really good at helping small businesses succeed. Maybe eventually I could help Ruby's expand, or start my own consulting business for restaurants in the neighborhood." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for Keisha's ambition and practical thinking. She was not viewing the money as a simple solution to her immediate crisis, but as an investment opportunity for her future. Her goals were realistic, but ambitious, grounded in skills she was already developing through her work experience. "Mom's going to be so proud," Tommy said. "She's always saying that the people who work here are family, and seeing family succeed is what makes all the hard work worth it." As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself observing the diner with new eyes. What he had initially seen as a simple restaurant was actually a training ground for entrepreneurship, a place where people learned valuable skills while supporting themselves and their families. Ruby was not just providing jobs. She was mentoring the next generation of business leaders, often without realizing it. Near closing time, as Marcus prepared to leave, he overheard another conversation that reinforced this observation. Two customers at a nearby table were discussing their plans to open a small auto repair shop, and they were asking Ruby for advice about managing cash flow and building customer relationships. Ruby listened thoughtfully and offered practical suggestions based on her decades of experience running a successful small business. This gave Marcus an idea that was bigger than simply helping individual employees with their immediate crises. What if there was a way to support the entire ecosystem of entrepreneurship that surrounded places like Ruby's Diner? What if successful business leaders could create mentorship and funding opportunities that would help ambitious people like Keisha and Tommy achieve their goals? As he walked to his car, Marcus began developing a mental framework for a new kind of charitable initiative. Instead of traditional charity that provided temporary relief, he could create a program that identified promising entrepreneurs in working-class communities and provided them with both capital and mentorship to build sustainable businesses. The focus would be on people who were already demonstrating initiative and business acumen through their current work, but who lacked the resources and connections to take their ideas to the next level. The next morning, Marcus called a meeting with his head of charitable giving, Sarah Chun, who had been managing his foundation's activities for 5 years. Sarah was brilliant and experienced, with an MBA from Wharton and previous experience at several major foundations. But, as Marcus explained his new vision, he realized that traditional philanthropy might not be the right model for what he wanted to accomplish. "What you're describing sounds more like venture capital than charity," Sarah said thoughtfully. "You want to identify and invest in promising entrepreneurs, not just provide aid to people in need. That's a fundamentally different approach that would require different expertise and different metrics for success." Marcus nodded, understanding the distinction. But these aren't the kind of entrepreneurs who would typically have access to venture capital. They're people working in diners and retail shops and service industries, people who are building real skills and developing viable business ideas, but who don't have the networks or backgrounds that traditional investors look for. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself returning to Ruby's Diner regularly, not just to see Keisha, but to understand the broader community that had captured his attention. He began to recognize the regular customers, learn their names and stories, and gradually developed relationships that felt more genuine than most of the social connections in his usual circles. There was Mr. Patterson, the elderly gentleman he had first noticed, who had served in Vietnam and now volunteered at a local literacy program. There was Maria Santos, a single mother who worked 2 jobs while studying for her nursing certification at night. There was James Morrison, a former factory worker who had started a small handyman business and was building a reputation for honest, reliable service. Each of these people had stories of struggle and ambition, setbacks, and small victories. They were creating value in their communities, supporting their families, and pursuing their dreams with limited resources but unlimited determination. And they all gathered at Ruby's Diner, where the affordable prices, welcoming atmosphere, and genuine community spirit provided a kind of support that no government program or charitable organization could replicate. One evening, as Marcus sat at his usual counter seat, he overheard a conversation that crystallized his understanding of what made this place special. Keisha was talking with a new employee, a young man named David who had recently been hired as a busboy. David had aged out of the foster care system and was struggling to find stable housing while working to complete his high school diploma. The thing about working here, Keisha was explaining, is that Ruby treats everyone like family. She'll work with you if you need to adjust your schedule for school or family obligations. She'll teach you skills that you can use anywhere. And the customers, most of them are good people who understand what it's like to work hard for everything you have. But what if I mess up? David asked, his anxiety evident in his voice. It was weeks into his regular visits to Ruby's Diner. Marcus made a mistake that would change everything. He had become so comfortable in his disguise and so invested in the community that he had begun to let his guard down. On this particular evening, he was sitting at the counter reading a newspaper when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from his assistant about a time-sensitive acquisition deal. Without thinking, Marcus pulled out his phone and began typing a response using the kind of business terminology and decision-making authority that would have been completely out of character for the working-class persona he had been maintaining. He discussed millions of dollars, international markets, and board approvals as if they were routine concerns. Close the Henderson deal at their asking price, he typed. The synergies justify the premium, and we need to move fast before the London markets open. Have legal draft the final terms tonight. It was only when he looked up from his phone that he realized Keisha had been standing nearby, refilling his coffee cup, and had clearly overheard enough of his phone conversation to understand that he was not who he appeared to be. Their eyes met, and Marcus saw recognition dawn in her expression, followed immediately by confusion and something that might have been hurt. Keisha finished refilling his coffee without saying anything, but her demeanor had changed completely. The easy warmth she had shown him over the past weeks was replaced by a professional distance that felt like a wall being erected between them. She continued serving other customers normally, but Marcus could feel her avoiding his section of the counter whenever possible. Marcus finished his meal quickly, his appetite gone as he realized the magnitude of his error. He had violated the trust of the community by maintaining a false identity, and, worse, he had done so while secretly observing and making judgments about their lives. What had felt like genuine connection now seemed manipulative and condescending, at least from Keisha's perspective. As he prepared to leave, Marcus knew he had to address what had happened. He could simply disappear and never return, but that would mean abandoning the plans he had been developing to help the community. More importantly, it would mean leaving things unresolved with people who had come to matter to him in ways he had not expected. He waited until Keisha was alone at the coffee station before approaching her. "I think we need to talk," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure other customers could not overhear. Keisha looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "I suppose we do," she said finally. "My shift ends in 20 minutes. There's a small park across the street if you want to wait." The 20 minutes felt like hours as Marcus sat on a bench in the park, trying to decide how to explain his deception without making the situation worse. He had spent his adult life negotiating complex business deals and managing corporate crises, but this conversation felt more challenging than any boardroom confrontation. When Keisha finally joined him, she sat at the opposite end of the bench, maintaining physical distance that matched the emotional distance he could see in her posture. She was still wearing her work uniform, and, in the light from the street lamp, Marcus could see the exhaustion that her professional demeanor usually concealed. "So," she said without preamble, "are you going to tell me who you really are, or do I need to figure it out myself?" Marcus took a deep breath. "My name is Marcus Wellington. I own Wellington Industries, and, according to Forbes, I'm worth approximately $8 billion. He paused, watching her reaction. "I've been coming to Ruby's because I wanted to experience something real, something authentic that I don't get in my normal life." Keisha stared at him in silence for several seconds. $8 billion, she repeated slowly. "And you've been sitting in our diner pretending to be a regular customer while we served you pot roast, and worried about making ends meet." "It started that way," Marcus admitted. "But it became something more. I care about this place, about the people here, about you and your situation and your dreams." "My situation?" Keisha's voice carried a sharp edge. "You mean my poverty? My struggle to keep a roof over my head? Was that entertaining for you?" Marcus felt her anger like a physical blow, but he recognized that it was justified. "No," he said firmly. "It was humbling, and it made me want to help." "Help?" Keisha repeated, and Marcus could hear the skepticism in her voice. "Like that money you left? Was that you playing God with the poor people?" "I saw that you were facing eviction," Marcus said quietly. "I wanted to help without making you feel obligated or uncomfortable. I thought if it seemed like a tip from a grateful customer." "You thought wrong," Keisha interrupted. "Do you have any idea how it feels to discover that your problems were entertainment for some rich man playing dress-up? That money I was so grateful for, that I thought came from someone who appreciated good service? It was just charity from someone who was studying me like a specimen." Marcus wanted to argue, to explain that his motive and never worked in a restaurant before, and "I can't afford to lose this job. Everyone messes up when they're learning." Keisha replied with gentle authority. "The difference is how you handle it. You own your mistakes, you learn from them, and you keep showing up ready to do better. Ruby values character more than experience, and if you show her you're reliable and willing to learn, she'll invest in helping you succeed." Marcus realized that what he had stumbled upon was not just a restaurant, but an informal business school where people learn not just technical skills, but fundamental principles about work ethic, customer service, and personal responsibility. The value of this education was immeasurable, but it was threatened by the same economic pressures that made it difficult for people like Keisha to pursue formal education or for entrepreneurs like Tommy to access startup capital. That night, as Marcus drove home through the quiet streets, he began to formulate a plan that would honor what made Ruby's Diner special while providing the resources and opportunities that could help its community thrive. It would require careful planning and a deep understanding of the people he wanted to help, but for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he had found a purpose that was worthy of his wealth and experience. The question was no longer whether he should help, but how to do so in a way that empowered rather than disrupted the community that had welcomed him as just another customer seeking a good meal and genuine human connection. Scene. Ruby's Diner represented something he had lost touch with in his rise to wealth and power. Authentic human connection, honest work, and a community that looked out for its members. Keisha embodied these qualities, and her current struggle seemed emblematic of the challenges facing working people who were doing everything right but still finding it difficult to get ahead. Outside in the parking lot, Marcus sat in his borrowed car for several minutes, watching through the diner windows as the evening shift concluded. He saw Keisha discover his note when she went to clear his table, witnessed her surprised reaction as she unfolded the paper and found the money inside. Even from his distance, he could see her look around the restaurant in confusion, trying to understand what had happened. Ruby noticed Keisha's reaction and came over to see what had caused it. Marcus watched as the two women examined the note together, their conversation animated but inaudible through the windows. He could see Ruby place a comforting hand on Keisha's shoulder, and, for a moment, both women seemed to pause in their busy routine to process this unexpected gift. As Marcus drove home that night, he felt a satisfaction that was different from his usual business accomplishments. He had made a direct, personal impact on someone's life without fanfare or recognition. There were no press releases or tax benefits, no public relations advantages or strategic considerations. It was simply one human being helping another, and The simplicity of that action felt more meaningful than many of his larger charitable endeavors. But even as he savored the feeling of having helped, Marcus found himself wanting more than the anonymous satisfaction of a single gesture. His brief glimpses into the world of Ruby's Diner had shown him a kind of authenticity and community that his wealth had gradually isolated him from. He wanted to understand more about the challenges people like Keisha faced, and he wanted to find ways to make a more lasting difference. The question was how to do so without disrupting the very qualities that made places like Ruby's Diner special in the first place. As he walked toward the door, Marcus made a mental note to return to Ruby's Diner again soon. There was something about this place, and particularly about Keisha, that had captured his attention in a way that surprised him. He could not put his finger on exactly what it was, but he knew that his brief escape from his billionaire identity had shown him something he had been missing. The cool evening air hit his face as he stepped outside, and Marcus took a deep breath before walking toward his borrowed car. Behind him, the warm light from the diner windows created a welcoming glow on the sidewalk, and he could see Keisha inside, continuing her work with the same professional grace he had observed all evening. As he drove home through the darkened streets of Chicago, Marcus found himself thinking not about the business deals waiting for his attention or the social obligations filling his calendar, but about the simple humanity he had witnessed at Ruby's Diner. It was a feeling he wanted to experience again, and soon.